Good evening, everyone. I call this meeting to order. This is the Land Use Planning and Zoning Committee of the City Council. All committee members are present today via Zoom, and this is a remote or online meeting where all participants will be on a video or audio conference. We are holding this meeting remotely so that everyone can participate safely while we are conducting business that is this way. We appreciate your patience. Members of the public will be able to address the committee if they have signed up for live public comment per the instructions published on the agenda and on our website Friday. Speakers will be moved into the meeting and will remain muted with their camera off until they are called upon to speak, at which point they can turn on their camera, unmute themselves, and will have 2 minutes to provide comments to the committee. After that, they will again be muted and return to be an attendee of the Zoom webinar. Written comments were also received and distributed to the committee members in advance of the meeting. Members of the public, city staff, and the media have the ability to view this meeting live through YouTube and Zoom webinar. This live stream can be accessed from most smartphones, tablets, or computers. For those watching on the live stream, thank you very much for joining us. We will start this meeting with public comment. Hello to those joining us to provide public comment. Here are the public comment ground rules. Comments are to be addressed to the committee members only through the chair. Please keep your comments germane to the topics on the agenda, and any disruptive conduct or non-germane commentary will result in removal from the Zoom webinar. Sorry, guys. Each speaker will be given 2 minutes to provide public comment. The timer will start once you begin speaking. Then the Zoom moderator, Mr. Moya, will let you know when your time is up. Mr. Moya, would you please call the name of the first speaker?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Our first speaker is Mr. Andrew Lipman. Mr. Lipman, please go ahead and unmute yourself, and your 2 minutes will begin when you start speaking.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair and councilors. I appreciate your time, and I appreciate to be able to speak to you. My name is Andrew Lipman. I'm here as a Vice President of the East Gateway Coalition of Associations. We represent the approximately 18 different neighborhood associations in District 9. I wanted to speak today really as a follow-up to the letter that we sent to all of the councilors addressed to Councillor Benjamin, dealing with the Neighborhood Association Recognition Ordinance, or the NARO. In particular, we identified a number of things in the actual bill, but I want to call your attention to 2 things. The first is in section 14-8-2-3, application and criteria for recognition of neighborhood associations. And it calls for payment of dues cannot be a prerequisite of membership or voting rights in the association. This is problematic for a number of reasons, and not the least of which is that, as you'll see in more detail in what we sent to you ahead of time, there are a lot of costs associated with the neighborhood association. Everything from insurance to refreshments in providing events. So there needs to be some dues to support those efforts. However, dues is never a barrier to anyone being involved in the neighborhood associations or the coalition. In fact, most neighborhood associations will probably tell you they had difficulty even finding people to get involved. So the amount of the dues and having dues is not a barrier to participation. And we believe that it should be left up to the individual neighborhood associations because it's always covered in their bylaws, as is mandated by the neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Our next speaker is Julie Drake. Ms. Drake, please feel free to turn your video on, unmute yourself, and your 2 minutes will begin when you start speaking.
Madam Chair.
Councillor Brego.
So Mr. Lipman only addressed one issue. Could we ask him to come back on? Because I'd like to hear his second issue.
Yes, we could. Mr. Lipman, would you mind waiting for the other speakers and joining at the end of this? Okay, never mind. They said you could do it right now.
Okay, thank you. Hopefully you can hear me. The second issue really involves notice. The NARO calls for notice of 2 people within a neighborhood association. And we feel that anyone in a particular area should be able to opt into the notice. The notices come via email. It's very easy to add people electronically in today's age. And it's problematic because oftentimes the designated people change. It varies from neighborhood association to neighborhood association, how good they are at distributing, zoning change requests and that kind of thing to their members. So we're asking that be rewritten to allow for more board members of a neighborhood association and for actually anyone within an area to opt in to receive those notices. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lipman. The staff, would you like to respond to that?
Good evening, Councillor Jones, Mr. Lipman. I'm Vanessa Baca, the manager of the Office of Neighborhood Coordination. It's nice to meet you via Zoom in a fashion. I did want to address your question in reference to neighborhood association dues. We are proposing an amendment later this evening that will address the question of dues and clarify that more that will address your question about it. The amendment intends to clarify that dues can be charged, but membership and voting rights are not to be based on charging dues.
Thank you, Ms. Baca. We appreciate that
Thank you.
clarification. We'll go to the next speaker, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Our next speaker is Julie Drake. Please feel free to turn your video on if you'd like, and your 2 minutes will begin when you start speaking.
I'm not sure how to turn on my video, so I apologize for that. I'm Julie Drake. I'm the president of Embudo Canyon Neighborhood Association and secretary of the East Gateway Coalition of Neighborhoods in District 9. We've worked with other coalitions to provide this input, and I appreciate the opportunity. Our comments were submitted on Monday, August 23rd by email to the committee members, council members, and their staff. Our recommendations are numerous in an effort to improve the proposed NARO for the good of the community. I'll only speak to a couple of recommendations. The first being the issue of notices related to the IDO and neighborhood associations. The opt-in issue was part of the NAPE report of November 2019 on page 4. We think that the opt-in is a key for equitable and fair participation from the community. The other issue in regards to dues, Andrew spoke to and Vanessa addressed, and so I won't say anything more about that. And I appreciate the openness to make some changes there. Finally, I've heard the councilors refer to the neighborhood engagement process as a contributing factor to the proposed NARO. While I believe that the NAPE was flawed, I recognize that it was an honest effort to gather input. I ask that you give our comments from neighborhood association and input from neighborhood associations that same consideration. Our input is specific to the current proposal that you're reviewing and in efforts to make improvements. Thank you for this opportunity.
Councillor Benjamin, do you have a comment?
Yes, just quickly appreciate the comments by Ms. Drake. And with regard to the NEP versus any comments we're receiving and have been receiving since the introduction of the legislation, I assure you that comments we're receiving currently and over the last year or so are given very much equal consideration. So thanks. I just wanted to answer that one question. I don't know if staff wanted to perhaps address the issue of with regard to the IDO and opting into notification.
Thank you, Councillor Benton. Ms. Baca, would you like to comment on this? Or Petra? Ms. Morris? Okay. think Ms. Morris is going to give us some comments on this also.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, councillors. In terms of the opt-in, that would be a different type of notice than currently the IDO considers. And so to make that sort of structural change to the notice would be more appropriate under an IDO annual update rather than this narrow update process. The Neighborhood Association Recognition Ordinance, the narrow, is really about the roles and responsibilities and formation of neighborhood associations, whereas IDO notice is about the IDO, and so the IDO is the better location for that more systemic change.
Thank you, Ms. Morris. I think we'll move on to our next speaker now, if there aren't any other questions. Councillor Brego, do you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask the staff to comment on the neighborhood engagement process.
Ms. Baca?
Councillor Borrego, yes, I'd be happy to speak to that. So I wanted just to address your inquiry about the neighborhood engagement process overall. I know there have been quite a few questions about it. In 2017, October 2017, the City Council announced their intent to address the shortcomings in the current NARO and subsequently contracted 2 independent consultants who engaged with 222 neighborhood association and homeowners citywide via phone and email. There were 93 neighborhood association face-to-face choice dialogues conducted. There were 159 flash interviews in both English and Spanish at 4 community centers in the city's 4 quadrants, and a number of group discussions hosted by the consultants themselves. Overall, the consultants talked with city councilors, other city departments and staff, neighborhood association board members and general members, homeowner association members, neighborhood coalitions, and individuals not affiliated with a neighborhood association. The overall outreach was conducted over 22 months total, and it culminated in the consultants giving an overview presentation to the City Council in November 2019, which all the neighborhood associations and coalitions were invited. Regular updates on the NEP were shared with the public through the ONC's neighborhood newsletter and the weekly e-news, as well as the ONC's website and social media venues. And this information is still available to the public on the ONC's website, as well as the narrow update website on the City Council homepage. I don't know if you had any more specific questions than that, but I'm happy to answer them.
No, that was a good summary. Thank you, Vanessa.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Baca. Thank you, Councillor Borrego. Any other questions from the council? Next speaker, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Our next speaker is Dr. Joe Valles. Dr. Valles, please feel free to turn your video on, unmute yourself, and your 2 minutes will begin when you start speaking.
Thank you and greetings again. I want to make some general comments because we've already submitted numerous concise issues that we would like to have addressed, but I want to address what Vanessa Baca just said about the NEP. Our question has always been, we have never heard which of the recommendations that the NEP in phase 3 gave the City Council, because there are some very favorable things there for neighborhood associations and positive things about what it is that they wanted from the city. And that did not come out in the NARO. The trouble with this 4-year-long NARO process is that it's been a totally top-down, and we know better than you can construct. The core issue is about trust. For those writing 071, it's clear you effectively kept us away from the process at just about every step. One has to wonder, where did the mistrust for neighborhood associations come from? Was there a resounding claim of abuses on the part of associations? And if so, is it verifiable? Or was it about a few disgruntled members? Because we've not been aware of NARO abuses on our part. Is it about the leadership within the associations? We can't help it if our membership keeps trusting us to represent them. Or is it a mindset that began with the IDO planning strategy to control neighborhoods because they have too much power? And I'm referring to the interoffice planning memos that I think are valid. This 4-year hiatus started with one newly formed neighborhood association extending its boundaries over another that had been inactive. That problem was solved, however. We don't currently experience neighborhood associations taking over other neighborhood associations, yet the revised neighborhood is replete with such inferences. We would warn the council of what a recently retired, experienced and savvy councilor once warned the city council. If you don't get buy-in at the beginning, it will come back to bite you in the behind. And so I'm not
Thank you,
gonna
Dr. Vyas. That's your 2
take
minutes.
more time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Vyas. Does staff have any comments on this? Apparently not. Next speaker, please. Councillor Borrego, I'm sorry, I keep missing your hand up there in the corner. Thank you.
I'll start waving.
Thank you.
This question is for Vanessa Baca, Ms. Baca. So Dr. Vyas mentioned that the NAP was never shared or maybe sporadically shared. Can you comment regarding that, please?
Yes, Councillor Borrego, I'd be happy to address that. So the reports that the consultants put together that included the data that they collected during the neighborhood engagement process were summarized in a report that is currently on the Neighborhood Association Engagement website, the Neff website rather. It's also on the Neighborhood Association Recognition Ordinance Project website as well. And in it, they summarize their findings and they break down the different findings that they had. And we actually did use that report and the findings of the consultants to inform the first draft and the second draft. And in fact, I will be addressing later on in the meeting that specific issue and giving the specific instances in which the feedback that was collected during the NARO was incorporated into this draft, but not the NARO, the NEP. All these acronyms are confusing, I know. So during the neighborhood engagement process, there were several findings that we did incorporate into the draft NARO, and there were some findings that we did not incorporate into the NARO, and I will give an overview of all of those and the reasons why the ones that were not incorporated into the draft NARO were not. And I mean, I can discuss that now, or if you'd like, I can discuss it further on in the presentation.
You can discuss it in your presentation. I would ask that you send the NAP in its complete form to Mr. Vyas.
Yes, I'd be happy. Yes, I will send all of the information on the NEP to Dr. Vyas and anyone else who would like it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Councillor Brego. Any other questions? The next speaker, please.
Our next speaker is Patricia Wilson. Ms. Wilson, please feel free to turn your video on, unmute yourself, and your time will begin when you start speaking.
Madam Chair, councilors, thank you for the opportunity to speak. Most people have no idea what the acronyms NARO and IDO mean or how they relate to each other. Of course, the NARO needs to be revised and adopted. Otherwise, there continues to be this circular confusion of one ordinance defining something in another ordinance that has been repealed and replaced by something that references the original ordinance. What I do know is that over a quarter of the recognized neighborhood associations in the city have written letters, either individually or through their coalitions, to express their concerns about the current draft of the NARO, and many have provided specific suggestions. Several dedicated neighbors have questioned the 2 points of contact requirement in the IDO. While we appreciate the adding of recognition for coalitions, it does need to be expanded. Now, as Ms. Morris just mentioned, that's better addressed in the next IDO amendment cycle. When neighbors have the opportunity to attend a facilitated meeting and communicate with the applicant, there are often concessions and compromises that benefit everyone. As Council President Brego said in an editorial almost 3 years ago, quote, "We must strike a balanced approach. This allows for development to occur, though not at the stake of losing what attracts us all to Albuquerque in the first place." Thank you all for deferring this from the last committee meeting, and I urge you to incorporate the input you've received prior to sending it back to full council, and I look forward to hearing about the amendments that Ms. Baca referenced. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Wilson.
Madam Chair, can I ask
Yes,
who
Councilor Moreno.
Ms. Wilson represents?
Yes, ma'am. I am currently the president of the Victory Hills Neighborhood Association. I serve as the treasurer on the District 6 Coalition. I've been a homeowner and a rental property owner in the Southeast Heights for 45 years.
Thank you, madam.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wilson. Thank you, Councillor Borrego. With seeing no other questions, we'll go to the next speaker, please.
Next speaker is Debbie Conger. Ms. Conger, please feel free to turn your video on, unmute yourself. Time will begin when you start speaking.
Madam Chair and councilors, good evening. I'm speaking as a resident of the city living in the South Los Altos neighborhood where I've lived for 40 years. In its past and proposed form, NARO gives recognized neighborhood associations something that is not available to any other group or persons. Notifications is spelled out in IDO Table 6-1. There are 9 different categories for which notifications are required, ranging from walls and fences to master development plans. As it stands now, these notifications are limited to 2 recognized neighborhood association points of contact. The whereas clause on page 2 of the proposed narrow, in stating the purpose of this ordinance, also says, while not limiting opportunities for any other person or non-recognized groups. Limiting the distribution of these notifications does limit opportunities for other persons and non-recognized groups. All neighborhood associations are run by volunteers, some better than others due to factors such as few members, lack of resources or abilities, and differing motives. I've encountered associations that are not familiar with their own bylaws, have never heard of NARO, and do not understand the importance of the notifications they get, and so just ignore them. Others may care, but have limited bandwidth due to full-time jobs or other personal demands on their time. Therefore, it is imperative that a change be made in the IDO and in NARO that would expand the ability to get notices to any resident who wants them, any resident, whether they live in an area represented by an association or that lacks an association. I sent specific comments on this ordinance Monday night to you all as to how I think this can be done. This is 2021, soon to be 2022. There is no reason this cannot be accomplished by an opt-in listserv. The technology exists. Please ensure O2171 allows this to happen. And I would like to make a comment on what Ms. Morris said about the IDO being the better place to do this. O2171 section 3 and 4 actually amends clauses in the IDO and removes non-recognized association. Okay.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Ms. Conger. Councillor Benjamin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to at least ask Ms. Conger to complete her second point that she was, or the one she was talking about as her time expired.
Thank you. So this O2171 sections 3 and 4 actually amend the definition of neighborhood association that is in the IDO. It removes non-recognized associations, and which is not clear the way it's written because there's not a red line, and it adds coalitions. So my point is, if O2171 can be used to amend the IDO in this way, it can also be used to amend the IDO to allow this opt-in listserv for other people. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you, Ms. Conger, and Madam Chair, thank you for your indulgence. And I just wanted to thank Ms. Conger because she submitted, a lot of very specific thoughts as opposed to just telling us to stop the presses and stop everything. I really appreciated that. And we are trying to incorporate numerous, we actually are going to be incorporating, if we pass the amendment this evening, numerous of the points, and we'll get into the details of that. So thank you, Ms. Conger.
Thank you, Councillor Ben. Thank you, Ms. Conger.
You're welcome.
Are you seeing no other questions? Next speaker, please.
Our next speaker is Richard Pena. Mr. Pena, please feel free to turn your video on, unmute yourself, and your time will begin when you start speaking.
Thank you so much. I'm reading from a prepared statement I wrote, so bear with me. But councilors, my name is Richard Pena, and I'm a resident of Taylor Ranch in Council District number 5. So I'm speaking this evening in support of the updated narrow. Though I'm not heavily involved in my own association, I follow the activities and the actions of the association, as well as the West Side Coalition. And I think the updated narrow was a step in the right direction. I appreciate the fact that membership and voting will no longer be predicated on someone's ability to pay dues. I also appreciate the consistency and recognition standards of for all the associations, which is something that was really lacking in the current narrow. But most importantly, I appreciate the democratic concepts that have informed the revised legislation, because neighborhood associations should be open to everyone and anyone who wants to be part of them. Oftentimes expressing a different opinion or idea to an established neighborhood association or to a coalition can be problematic if there are the same members who attempt to exclude others. And I see this revised narrow as a very positive attempt to increase diversity in neighborhood associations citywide. I also appreciate the fact that the city spent over 2 years getting resident and neighborhood feedback in order to revise this legislation. And having that input was directly impactful on how this updated legislation was written. Land use and development are important topics to neighborhoods, but they're not the only subjects of interest to all associations. Many neighborhoods and many individual residents like myself are also interested in neighborhood safety, economic growth, and working cohesively to make our neighborhoods functional, beautiful, healthy. And this updated ordinance takes us in those directions. So I respectfully ask that this committee and the city council as a whole pass this ordinance in a timely fashion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pena.
I see no other questions. So thank you, Mr. Pena. Thanks for joining us.
Our next speaker is Jane Beckel. Ms. Beckel, please feel free to turn your video on, unmute yourself, and your time will begin when you start speaking.
Madam Chair and councilors, my name's Jane Beckley, and I'm the president of Santa Fe Village Neighborhood Association. The text of the written comments I submitted earlier today and the points I now make were reviewed by email with Santa Fe Village Neighborhood Association board members. 5 indicated agreement with these. 2 provided no response and also no objections. I want to highlight 2 of 4 specific Santa Fe Village neighborhood concerns related to the proposed narrow. Concerns which we believe jeopardize the viability of Santa Fe Neighborhood Association, our maintenance of recognized status, and our opportunity to effectively represent the interest of Santa Fe Village. First, the narrow provision, which requires affirmation of joining the neighborhood association to be considered a member, effectively narrows the definition of membership for Santa Fe Village Neighborhood Association, poses an obstacle to us to resident engagement, and burdens Santa Fe Village Neighborhood Association with recording, tracking, and maintaining documentation of this requirement. The anticipated negative impact of requiring residents to provide some affirmation, no matter how liberally we define that, of their intent to join the neighborhood association, which we can both record and have available to document, is based on feedback from current residents and our observations of how we already struggle to engage current residents. Secondly, we reiterate our position that given the very limited time allotted for public comment, which is 90 to 120 seconds, the requirement that a neighborhood spokesperson use a portion of that limited time to outline how a neighborhood position was reached subtracts from the time available to comment on the substance of the neighborhood position. That this is part of the existing narrow does not change the effect of this provision. If it is deemed necessary to ensure that a spokesperson truly represents a neighborhood association, either additional time for
Thank you,
public
ma'am.
comment.
Your time is up. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Councillor Benjamin, you have a question?
Yes, thanks. Yeah, just a point. I would hope, or maybe staff can help with this, but my understanding is that language has to do with formal positions taken, and not that just as Ms. Baca is speaking today, that she's not, if this were in place, she would not be required to state that. However, if she's, my understanding is that if it's in a formal proceeding of the city in terms of a land use decision or anything of that sort, then in that situation, yes, the chair of such a body would certainly be within their rights to ask how a position was taken. And I think that's the intention. And I would ask staff, I know that we might be within the amendment, are we tweaking that language at all? I understand how it might be confusing, but I just want to say that was absolutely never the intent. That again, when a formal position is taken in a matter that is receiving input from a recognized neighborhood association with standing on land use matters, I think that was what it was most intended for. But you know, when someone asks about it, that was my understanding. But could staff help out with that?
Madam Chair, Councillor Benson, your description of this is accurate. The language that is in the narrow has not changed from the existing narrow, and your description of how that language is used is also accurate. It's mostly used at land use decision boards, so the ZHE, the DRB, and the EPC, and it's used prior to the clock starting. And so, for example, if a member of a neighborhood association gets up to speak, the chair will ask them, are they representing themselves or a neighborhood association? And they say a neighborhood association, and usually at EPC they get granted extra time for that. And the chair will then ask your position, what neighborhood association you're representing, how they might have come to any decisions. And then after that, the clock begins and they're able to give their public comment. So this doesn't affect the amount of time that a person is allotted in those land use situations.
If I may, Madam Chair, so yeah, that's been my experience, that the full statement is given, and then if a member of one of these bodies or the chair chose to, they could say, well, how was that decision reached? And that, I think that's all this is intended to say, but maybe we need to clarify more.
Thank you, Councillor. Staff, do you have any other comments, or Councillor Benton, any other questions? Okay, let's move on to our next speaker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Our next speaker is Peggy Neff. Ms. Neff, please feel free to turn your video on, unmute yourself, and your time will begin when you start speaking.
Good afternoon, councilors, public. I keep my video dark to represent the members of the public who are restricted from getting into this meeting. You have my written comments. I'll be reading them. First, again, respectfully, I need to ask Councillor Benton, Councillor Gibson, and Councillor Jones to recuse themselves from discussions on 02171, the narrow. To support this, I ask Attorney Melendez to explain the concept of clean hands doctrine as it applies to the legalities involved in the current widespread public perception that this legislation may have more to do with developers' interests than in providing a clear, comprehensive, and fair neighborhood association recognition ordinance. Second, for the record, this week a formal complaint was filed at the state of New Mexico's Attorney General's office asking for injunctive relief regarding 02171. It is based on the fact that true and comprehensive data is not available for the public regarding the creation of this ordinance. It is unclear how the flawed, selective, and exclusive neighborhood engagement processes reports led to this draft, and it is unclear how this draft has become legislation draft as neighborhood leaders were not involved. Furthermore, it will be very hard to show that these two LUPS meetings will qualify as providing public meetings and administrative tasks that is as big as crafting a comprehensive citywide narrow. Regarding the IDO, I have been asking for amendments to the notification process for 3 years. Ms. Morris, Ms. Schultz, Councillor Winter, Councillor Besson, nor the planning staff have addressed these requests. In addition to this, I believe that the IDO needs to be amended to address how neighborhoods are involved in the amendment process itself. For 3 years, I've been asking for this and to be part of the amendment process without any support from council members nor council staff or the planning department. I'm asking you to step back, reconsider, and begin anew. Use this draft or don't, but host public meetings, address public comment, write clear, comprehensive, and a fair ordinance that allows both for alliances and disagreements within neighborhoods. One that encourages and builds on what we have now.
Thank you, Ms. Neff. Your time is up.
Thank you. And Councillor Benjamin, you have a question?
I have a statement, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Benjamin.
The implication of Ms. Neff is that 3 of the 4 councillors that are attending this meeting are somehow in the pocket of private interest, and that's the motivation of this this ordinance. I just want to say that I have been on the council. I think I'm on my 16th year right now. A lot of people would say I shouldn't be here anymore. But nonetheless, during those 16 years, I have never made a single decision in the interest of myself or any private interest. I have only and categorically only made decisions and conducted myself in what I saw as the best interest of my district and of the city. I'd like Mr. Melendez perhaps to address this business of recusal and what are the legal requirements of recusal.
Thank you, Councillor Ben. Mr. Melendez?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm having a technical issue that won't permit me to turn on my camera at the moment, but I'm happy to take the question. So the City Council, I think as Councillor Benton alluded, is subject to limitations within the city charter that would guide when it is appropriate or when it is not to recuse yourselves in certain matters. This legislation being a general legislative matter, the recusal standard would be if there is a direct financial interest in the outcome of the bill, and an interest that exceeds the general interest that might be advanced or that is being impacted by the legislation. And so when analyzing this type of question, you essentially look at what the nature of the bill is and what the nature of the potential outcomes are. And it's hard to envision with respect to the narrow any type of basis for recusal of a counselor based on anything that would be required in the charter as far as a financial interest. So that does not appear to be an issue with respect to your deliberation of this bill.
Thank you, Mr. Melendez. Are there any other questions from the councilors? Thank you. We'll move on to the next speaker now.
Why you should recuse yourself.
Next speaker is Nita Day. Ms. Day, please feel free to turn your video on, unmute yourself. Your time will begin when you start speaking.
Good evening, Madam Chairwoman, commissioners. I would like to start with a couple different points, probably about 5 at most. First, I represent the Taylor Ranch Neighborhood Association, and we did send in some written comments via a letter, both to your guys' emails as well as electronically. And so my comments will be short, but they are to emphasize the concerns that the Taylor Ranch Neighborhood Association has. First is that we agree there should be an opt-in position. We have heard before that not all neighborhood associations don't represent all individuals, and we agree with that. There are individuals who may have a different opinion, and we respect that, and we respect the democratic process. However, stamping out those voices and just saying they can't get noticed because there's no mechanism for them to get noticed is not appropriate, and it interferes with the democratic process. So there should be an opt-in provision for individuals to receive notice, whether or not they're with a neighborhood association. The second issue is of the boundaries. I did address this in my letter, but overlapping boundaries is not an issue. TRNA has many neighborhood associations within its own neighborhood association, as well as HOA and coalitions. As you're aware, we're one of the biggest neighborhood associations in the state of New Mexico. We will fully comply with the new revised NARO should it pass. However, many neighborhood associations are very concerned that they will not be able to meet your guys' expectations to become recognized neighborhood associations. That is concerning. The boundaries, when we have a neighborhood association who comes to TRNA and says, we are in your boundaries, all that does is promote more compromise and more collaboration between communities. These are our neighbors. We are trying to make sure that we have shared common public interest, but yet not all the specific needs can be addressed through one neighborhood association, as Mr. Pena pointed out in his
Thank you, Ms.
comments
Day. Your
earlier.
time is up.
Thank you. And Councillor Benton, do you have a question?
Madam Chair, so the question of other associations or people within a recognized neighborhood association and not having, isn't overlapping boundaries only applicable to recognized? And when we're talking about recognized here, anyone who's listening who doesn't realize this only has to do with the unique standing provided to recognized neighborhood associations in zoning and land use matters. Isn't that all we're talking about? There's no limitation on freedom of association of anyone. And of course, neighborhoods who do share interests, recognized and not recognized, can be members of coalitions that they wish and can communicate freely as they wish. Doesn't this only have to do with their standing? I guess I would ask that of staff, perhaps Mr. Melendez or Ms. Morris.
Who would like to answer that question? Ms. Morris?
Madam Chair, councillors, yes, as Councillor Benson discussed, the standards that we're requiring for the recognized neighborhood association status and the recognized neighborhood coalition status is applicable to IDO notice. If a neighborhood association doesn't want to meet those requirements, they can still form. However, they just wouldn't get the notice and the appeal standing that is granted via the IDO. And that is also how the IDO operates today. You have to be either a recognized neighborhood association or a registered neighborhood association. And with the interim guidelines in place, you cannot have overlapping boundaries to be in either of those two categories.
Thank you, Ms. Morris.
And Madam Chair, if I may.
Yes, Councillor Benton, then Councillor Borrego, I do see you. So Councillor
follow up
Benton.
with Ms. Morris. I mean, the idea that all individuals and anyone and everyone would receive these formal notices, is that, doesn't that present some serious obstacles? It's not just a matter of having a listserv. I mean, what if you create a listserv and someone is left off, and then we've created an expectation that everyone and anyone who might have wanted to know did not receive a personal notice.
Madam Chair, Councillor Benson, that idea of a listserv, as I talked about a little bit earlier, is really more a larger systemic change, and would require is something that would require a revision. That was truck. Would require a revision to the IDO. There are some significant things that would need to be thought through for some sort of opt-in system, and I think that is something that we would need to think about outside of the narrow process in terms of the logistics of it, the policies of it, and putting that into the IDO.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Did I answer all I'm not sure if I answered all of your questions there.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions, but Councillor Borrego, you've had your hand up before.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, Ms. Day. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. My question is regarding the overlapping boundaries. And you said that there are many neighborhoods that are concerned that they can't meet, the requirements of the, I mean, that's specifically what you said, that can't meet the requirements of the neighborhood, but I'm sorry, NARO. Can you tell me, can you elaborate a little bit more on that? On what exactly you're talking about and what you mean by that?
Councillor Brego, yes, I can. Thank you for the opportunity to do so. What I meant is more that many neighborhood associations strive just to get people involved. And a lot of the neighborhood associations, because it's a volunteer-driven organization, there have been neighborhood associations that we are aware of that have went defunct because they cannot find the manpower behind them to do the neighborhood association. And so when there is the overlapping boundaries and there is kind of even dispute within the neighborhood, when I say the neighborhood, I'm talking about TRNA specifically, it is incumbent that I think the TRNA board really take an opportunity to use that to try to really understand what that other neighborhood's concerns are and rethink. Maybe it might mean stepping back and rethinking our own position to become more collaborative, to be more understanding of what their needs are. That's not to say that there might not be disagreements between TRNA and maybe another neighborhood, even within its own boundaries. But that disagreement is a healthy democratic process. And we still recognize neighborhood associations within our boundary as our neighbors, that we have a collective interest in promoting the health, safety, and general welfare of the West Side. And with that collective interest, those overlapping boundaries, I think are critical. It helps to build community across, it helps expand community across community. And not everything that TRNA gets legal notice about, TRNA is going to be able or willing, simply manpower alone, or even maybe a board decision to appeal. But maybe it really means a lot to another neighborhood association that's directly impacted, and they should have that legal standing and ability to appeal, regardless of TRNA.
So let me reiterate what I think I hear you saying. And you tell me if I'm incorrect, but I guess when you have overlapping boundaries and you have neighborhoods that are overlapping, sometimes a neighborhood that may not be as, that may be a little more fragile would have that support that you're, whatever that support is, be it number, be it, people participating. I mean, the work distribution. So you're saying that is actually helpful to supporting our neighborhoods, right? Is that what I'm hearing?
I would agree with that statement. Absolutely. That overlapping boundaries are not necessarily for new neighborhoods to come in and form and overlap with boundaries of existing neighborhoods is not a problem. I don't believe so. I think it's healthy to we as a board believe it's healthy to the democratic processes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councillor Brego. Councillor Gibson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I find that really complicated. So let me just try to see if I can organize my thoughts well enough to make my point here. So if I'm in a neighborhood association, I live in Jerry Klein Park Neighborhood Association, and we are sort of adjacent to what? Another one, I can't think of the name of it right now. So if I'm right on the edge, and let's say now we decide that my block is going to be, wants to be represented by the other neighborhood association, as well as my own. Mark Twain is the other one. That seems like it's going to be really rather complicated, rather than, I guess, a more simple way of maybe handling whatever issues that I might have on the first block inside Jerry Klein Park neighborhood. So if I need help, that I think that the people across Louisiana probably experience, that I experience, rather than just for the two neighborhood associations to sort of collaborate, or maybe just myself with them collaborating. I don't see how actually having membership in two separate neighborhood associations really furthers the causes of trying to make improvements.
Thank you, Councillor Gibson. Were you looking for an answer on that, or?
Not really. It's just a thought that came up. I didn't think about this at all, but I think it's an interesting topic, and I just wanted to register that.
Thank you, Councillor Gibson. And Councillor Brego, you would like to have the floor again?
I would, thank you. And I would just say that I do not agree, Councillor Gibson. I think that this is very a way to build collaboration when you have, I mean, I sit here and I'm looking outside of my neighborhood, and I'm thinking, you know, when you have joint boundaries that are dealing with a similar issue, and I'm going to give you an example. I mean, I have a neighborhood right across the street from me and we're dealing with issues regarding street, you know, speeding, for example. I mean, I think that actually when you have those really hard boundaries, sometimes it becomes very divisive. And when you have some of those gray areas where, I mean, I think of a Venn diagram, if anybody remembers what that is. You know, there are areas that in the Venn diagram that actually where you build that collaboration and you build that community. So I respectfully, Councillor Gibson, I just kind of have to disagree with that statement.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Borrego. Councillor Gibson, you'd like to respond, and then staff would like to comment on all of this. Councillor
Right.
Gibson?
Right, and just really, really quickly, I think all of that can happen without being a member of two different associations. I don't think that is a good argument. That collaboration is a good argument. We can't collaborate to the best of our ability unless we can belong to two different neighborhood associations. Because I see it in my own district, just you know, literally a couple of blocks away, neighborhood associations, you know, getting together and tackling issues and taking care of them the best that they can. So I think it's kind of a weak argument. Thank you, though.
Thank you, Councillor Gibson. And Ms. Baca, you would like to make some comments on these discussions?
Madam Chair, yes, I would be happy to address Ms. Day's concerns and comments about overlapping boundaries. I agree that having overlapping boundaries can be a beneficial thing in the sense of collaborating with neighborhoods with the overlapping boundaries. However, it's presented as much a problem with other neighborhood associations throughout the city, which is one of the reasons we decided to address it specifically in this updated NARO. I do also want to make the point that no neighborhood association that currently has overlapping boundaries now is going to lose their recognized status once this updated NARO is passed. So just make sure that everybody understands that there will not be any kind of penalty for current neighborhood associations that do have those overlapping boundaries. But there have been several cases of other neighborhood associations that have had significant conflicts that have caused significant issues within their neighborhoods and among their membership because of the overlapping issues, overlapping boundary issues. And that is the key reason why it was decided to include that section in this updated draft.
Thank you, Ms. Baca. Councillor Borrego, you have another question? I know, that's the best part.
I'm sorry, I'm muted and I'm talking to myself. So I'm asking Ms. Baca if she could just send me specific instances where those issues have occurred, if she would. I'd like to see that. I'd like specific examples.
Councillor Borrego, I'd be happy to send those to you.
And by the way, the link, one of the links you sent me today didn't work. So I just wanted to
I'll make sure and follow up on that. Apologies.
Thank you, Councillor Brego. Thank you, Ms. Baca. Our next speaker, please.
Next speaker is Greg Weirs. Mr. Weirs, please feel free to turn your video on, unmute yourself, and your time will begin when you start speaking.
Madam Chair and councilors, the Nob Hill Neighborhood Association has sent comments on the NARO to all city councilors, and I have submitted them also in this meeting's written comments. And I'm not going to go through each one of them, but my comments will reflect those of the Nob Hill Neighborhood Associations. So the present NARO has its shortcomings, but the proposed legislation does not address them, in our opinion. Instead, the proposed NARO adds more recognition requirements for reporting and compliance, which add overhead costs. And by that, mostly I mean volunteer time, but we do not see any tangible benefits from those additional costs. And while these new requirements we believe are well-intentioned, they are, in our opinion, unlikely to prevent the abuses of problematic associations, neighborhood associations. So perhaps some of the changes are simply not worded clearly and can be addressed, but this points out the shortcomings of the process that was used to develop the legislation. The section on recognizing neighborhood coalitions has not been thought through by the authors, in our opinion. Requiring coalition membership to allow individual residents and business owners is intended to give them access to notifications where there's no existing association for their geographic area. But how are coalitions supposed to have an orderly and democratic process when an individual's vote counts as much as an association that represents usually tens to hundreds of individuals? Madam Chair and councilors, by passing this legislation now, we think you are missing an opportunity to greatly improve the NARO and the general health and effectiveness of neighborhood associations. And if you insist on moving forward with this legislation, then please at least delay it until the community concerns and negative impacts can be addressed. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Oh, let's go to the next speaker, please.
Our next speaker is Renee Horvath. Ms. Horvath, please feel free to turn your video on, unmute yourself, and your time will begin when you start speaking.
Good afternoon. Can everybody hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Please proceed.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you. And I just want to, I do appreciate that we had a deferral because our neighborhood association did need to talk about some of the changes in this new one. And one of them was the membership dues not being a requirement for voting and membership. And that does go conflict with our bylaws, and we needed to talk about it. We do understand the hardship, concerns, but it is, I agree with the first speaker that, we need to function. We do communicate with our members with flyers, mailings, website updates, sign maintenance. So we do need the membership dues. And I think we could come up with some language that everybody could agree with, but I think the membership dues is pretty important. Secondly, yes, we do have overlapping boundaries, but it really hasn't been a problem. We have a lot of HOAs, we have neighborhood associations within our boundaries. A lot of them focus on their more internal issues, and HOAs focus a lot on landscape issues. And I just wanna, and we really haven't had a problem. Taylor Ranch has, we focus a lot on sensitive development because we got a lot of open space, sensitive areas with the river and the petroglyphs. So we do promote, stay on top of trying to get really good designs and sensitive designs around those areas. And I just wanna point out that there was 2 examples of notification. I do send notification to some of the people on top of the mesa because they haven't been able to form a neighborhood association. The one I talked about last time, I sent them a notice a year ago. I said, you're going to get 52 unit townhouse complex and there's a hearing coming up. He said, thanks very much. But ONC can't finalize my association request, but the developers can. Can I finish? I have 2 examples.
Thank you, Ms. Horvath. Go ahead. And let's try to limit the questions on this one, Councilor Borrego, since we're giving her more time.
So he was having troubles.
I was just asking for extension. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so he was having troubles to form a neighborhood association because of the moratorium. He says, well, then I'll have to send another letter to the mayor. Ultimately, yes, he did form a neighborhood association, but I know there's other people that are having problems getting notified. And so if I know about them, I'll send them a notice, but it would be helpful if they could request from ONC to be notified because they're getting a lot of development that impact them. And the second point with HOAs, there was a case over here where these people were getting a 4-story apartment complex right behind their homes. And their HOA says, we don't deal with land use. So they were not involved in the IDO process. And then they were surprised they were getting this 4-story right behind their home. And it's created a lot of problems. So HOAs don't really notify on land use issues. So we need to be aware of that. So this argument about notification, maybe we should allow people who say, hey, I know I'm interested in what's going on. I'd like to be notified, whether you're recognized or not. So you may want to consider that.
Thank you, Ms. Horvath. We appreciate your comments. Staff has some questions or comments on this, please.
Madam Chair, yes, I'd be happy to address some of Ms. Horvath's comments. The issue that she raised in terms of the moratorium, there's not actually a moratorium in place on neighborhood associations forming. There never has been a moratorium. There are something called interim guidelines, which do limit the formation of new neighborhood associations in the event there are overlapping boundaries. I believe Ms. Horvath is referring to the Vista del Prado Neighborhood Association, which was formed in Council District 5, I want to say in 2019. And for that specific reason, they did not have overlapping boundaries. And they were furthermore in an area where they had absolutely no other neighborhood associations in proximity to them. So they were allowed to form. That was prior to me being the manager. So I'm not aware of the issues that Ms. Horvath is alluding to in terms of contacting the mayor's office. But yes, they did form a new neighborhood association and they do receive notification, to my knowledge, anytime that there is a public notice inquiry that involves their neighborhood association. They should be receiving it. Their contact information is sent to the developers. I'm sorry, what was the other part of her question? I'm sorry, Ms. Horvath.
Oh, yeah, so I just want to say it was not easy for him to form a neighborhood association, and he had a lot of frustration. I saw his emails. There's a lot of frustration. So I just want to share that with everybody so they're aware. And the other thing, HOAs, some of them say we don't deal with land use. And so those people don't get notified, and then they're surprised, whoa, where did this come from? So we need to be aware.
Thank you, Ms. Horvath. Thank you. We appreciate your comments. Councilor Borrego, you have a question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do have a question. Vanessa, for the Ms. Baca. So the interim guidelines, how long are those in place for?
They were enacted in October 2017, and they will be in place through December 2021 or until such time as the narrow is passed, whichever comes first.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Councilor Borrego. Thank you, councilors.
Our next speaker is Ms. Ward. Ms. Ward, please feel free to turn your video on, unmute yourself, and your time will begin when you start speaking.
Madam Chair, based on ONC responses to neighborhood concerns regarding the proposed NARO, it seems clear that those in city government who are proponents of this legislation continue to either misunderstand or dismiss the fundamental issue of intrusion. Out of one side of the collected mouth of proponents come inconsistent edicts about membership of private and voluntary organizations, while the other side spouts deflections and evasions that are the declarations that the ONC does not enforce bylaws of neighborhood associations. Some of the responses reflect neither the actions of the ONC nor previously codified requirements. Here's one example. On page 1 of the matrix distributed by the ONC, the following statement occurs. The current NARO requires neighborhoods to provide annual meeting minutes as a means of confirming democratic voting processes have been adhered to, and this has been carried over into the proposed NARO. Please provide that language. My review of subsection 14824, criteria for recognition of neighborhood associations of the Code of Ordinances, did not reveal that requirement. Further, from at least as far back as 2013, the annual report notice from the ONC at no time indicated the need to supply minutes from the annual meeting because it was not required. Prior to the adoption of the IDO, notification requirements regarding developments were to be made within the applicable notification distance to any neighborhood association which has filed its articles of incorporation, bylaws, or other document indicating its existence, which includes key contact people, organizational structure, current boundaries, and preferred mailing address with the Office of the Neighborhood Coordination. It appears the single purpose of this many-tentacled proposed NARO to be to strangle the voice of neighborhoods. Please vote against its passage. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ward, for your comments. Staff, would you like to address any of the questions that might have arisen or the comments? No, we don't. That is the last of our speakers this evening. We have two more. Okay, we didn't put them on my list. We have two more speakers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Regan, can you hear me? Are you there? And Mr. Barry Solons as well. Can you hear me? And are you there?
Dan Regan is here.
Thank you, sir.
Barry Sullins is here too.
Great, thank you. If you guys would like to turn on your video, you can accept the invitation to become a panelist. If not, Mr. Regan, once you start speaking, your time will begin.
I don't have a question. Barry Sullins.
Mr. Sullins, let's do Mr. Regan first, and then we'll go to you for comments. Mr. Regan, please feel free to unmute yourself or turn on your video, and your time will begin when you start speaking.
I have a question.
I'm Dan Regan. Am I supposed to go first?
Yes, sir.
Good evening, Mr. Regan.
Good evening, Madam Chair and LUPS members. I am very concerned about the possible path this current version of the new NARO could take before the full council votes on it. Based on a response I received from ONC this past Friday, there are some anticipated amendments that could be made to the NARO version currently under consideration. They've been mentioned, some of them have been mentioned tonight. If those anticipated amendments occur, will they be shared with the residential community organizations and the public well before any meeting at which the LUPS would vote on the fate of the NARO? If the new revision of the NARO is not given to NA's coalitions and general public for comment prior to the LUPS meeting which votes on the NARO, then the bill's sponsor will be in with the compliance of and consent of the other LUPS members, will hide once more behind procedural measures that deny taxpayers voice in a piece of legislation that defines into the next several decades who the taxpayers and private property owners will be in the eyes of the city council when it comes to zoning. I do not know if any of you have given serious thoughts to how demeaning, insulting, and damaging that process would be to the folks you're supposed to be serving. And if the council accepts the NARO from the LUPS without community input being allowed to any anticipated amendments and proceeds to the NARO, then they too will have bought into a sham process and product that tells Albuquerque taxpayers that they simply don't count and don't matter because y'all know better what we need. That's one heck of a way to treat the folks who elected you. And for some of you, will be going back to the polls in less than 3 months to vote again. Thank you for your attention to my comments.
Thank you, Mr. Regan. Councillor Benjamin?
Yeah, I mean, the amendment that's before us tonight, of course, is in the public record already. It's a proposed amendment, hasn't been voted upon. However, that amendment is in response to comments from many of the folks who spoke here tonight. You know, Mr. Regan didn't provide any constructive comments. There's this sort of thing. I beg your pardon. I'm not addressing you, sir. I'm addressing the committee. Mr. Regan, since he spoke about me specifically, you know, I have always been open. I've been in meetings with Mr. Regan and Mr. Valles and others. I have been an open book as far as what we've been doing. We put out a version of this bill early in the year. It's been hashed over. The procedures of the city council are not such that anytime an amendment is proposed, it's going to be put out and debated amongst the public prior to it going to a committee. This committee is not passing anything tonight just for the sake of, I think, the previous speaker that was mentioning that we were going to pass something tonight or someone did. You know, this is a recommending body to the city council, and the city council will finally decide what is in the bill and whether it passes or fails. So, you know, just to be very clear, the amendment that we're going to be discussing later, and we haven't even gotten to it, but that amendment is in response to public comment and constructive public comment, as opposed to people just telling us to stop what we're doing.
Thank you, Councillor Benton, and I believe we have one more speaker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Solons, you can go ahead and unmute yourself, and your time will begin when you start speaking.
This is Barry Sullins, and I don't have a comment.
Oh, you don't want to provide any comments, sir?
No, sir.
Okay. Thank you. Madam Chair, that'll conclude public comments.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, councillors, for participating. Let's move right along with the agenda.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Councillor Borrego?
I was just notified that Michael Brasher is waiting to speak.
I'm sorry, Councillor Brego, he was never registered and he is not signed up on our list. But we appreciate his, maybe he'll come through the next time. Thank you, Councillor Borrego. Let's go on to agenda item A071. Councillor Benton, would you like to introduce this?
Thank you, Madam Chair. 071 is repealing the Neighborhood Association Recognition Ordinance, Section 1418-2, and replacing it with a revised Neighborhood Association Recognition Ordinance and prescribing responsibilities and services offered by the ONC and making revisions to the Integrated Development Ordinance related to Neighborhood Association notice. I move it do pass.
Councillor Gibson has seconded that. So let's move on to the presentation.
Madam Chair, members of the LEPS Committee, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. I'll be giving you an overview of the process we engaged in when we started updating the Neighborhood Association Recognition Ordinance. I'll give an overview of the neighborhood engagement process, and I will bring us to where we are today. So with your permission, I will get started. So in October 2017, the City Council announced their intent to address the shortcomings in the current Neighborhood Association Recognition Ordinance, or the NARO as it is called, which was originally passed in 1987 and had been minimally updated in the ensuing years. Interim guidelines that temporarily restricted the formation of new neighborhood associations whose proposed boundaries would conflict with the existing associations were put into place and are still in place as the NARO process continues, and as I had detailed earlier. Between early spring 2018 and fall 2019, independent consultants were contracted to conduct an extensive outreach initiative with city councilors, city departments, neighborhood associations, community groups, and individuals not affiliated with a neighborhood association in order to ascertain what changes should be incorporated into the updated NARO. and I believe I had gone into detail on this earlier, but I'll reiterate that as well. This outreach effort was called the Neighborhood Engagement Process, or the NEP. The NEP involved contacting 222 neighborhood and homeowner associations via telephone and email, with 93 neighborhood association face-to-face choice dialogues, 159 flash interviews conducted in English and Spanish at 4 community centers in the city's 4 quadrants, and a variety of surveys, one-on-one and group discussions hosted by the NEP consultants themselves. Overall, the NEP engaged with city councilors, other city departments and staff, neighborhood association board members and general members, homeowner associations, neighborhood coalitions, and individuals not affiliated with a neighborhood association. This outreach was conducted over 22 months total and culminated in the consultants giving an overview to the City Council in November 2019, to which all the neighborhood associations and coalitions were invited. Regular updates on the NEP were shared with the public through the ONC's neighborhood newsletter and weekly e-news, as well as the ONC's website and social media venues. And this information is still available on the ONC's website to this day and open to the public, as well as the narrow update website on the City Council homepage. An initial draft of the updated NARO was sent to all neighborhood associations on file with the Office of Neighborhood Coordination, or the ONC as we call ourselves, in January 2021. Extensive feedback from neighborhood associations and coalitions was received. Excuse me, sorry, I lost my place. There we go. And the legislation was subsequently revised to incorporate much of this community feedback. The revised draft of the NARO was sent to all of the neighborhood associations and coalitions in July 2021 and was introduced at the City Council meeting on Monday, August 2nd, 2021, before being referred to the Land Use Planning and Zoning Committee, which we are at today. Councilors and the ONC have continued to receive extensive feedback on the updated draft NARO and expect to receive more neighborhood commentary as the legislative process continues once the draft NARO goes to the full City Council. The revised draft NARO contains updated language that more clearly defines the roles and expectations of recognized neighborhood associations and recognized coalitions, the ONC, and other city departments. One of the premises behind the revised NARO is that the city is going to recognize an outside group in some way. That group should conduct its activities in a fair and democratic way. In the case of neighborhood associations, fairness can be promoted by outlining minimum democratic processes that can be followed to help promote inclusion and reliable community representation. This updated NARO clarifies the standards that neighborhood associations and coalitions will be asked to follow when conducting certain business, including elections and voting. In addition, the revised NARO addresses the following. So to become recognized, a new neighborhood association or neighborhood coalition must allow any resident or business to become a member. That includes people who are renting. They must have clearly defined boundaries that do not overlap with any other neighborhood association or coalition. They must have bylaws that clearly define the processes by which board members are elected and or replaced and how annual meetings are noticed. Have 2 designated points of contact on file with the ONC, and they must complete the ONC's compliance form and submit that to our office. To stay recognized, a neighborhood association or neighborhood coalition must have an annual meeting and submit an annual report form to the ONC. They must maintain 2 designated points of contact with the ONC, including names, addresses, telephone numbers, and email addresses. And to address a question that did come up with one of our neighborhood constituents, using a neighborhood association specific address or email is fine if people have concerns about using their personal address or telephone number. Recognized neighborhood associations must have clearly defined democratic processes for holding elections that are spelled out in their bylaws, and they must clarify to members that dues are not a prerequisite for either membership or voting. So recognition itself means that a neighborhood association or neighborhood coalition has the responsibility of receiving and disseminating developer notifications and permit application information to their members, as well as other information of interest or that might benefit or otherwise affect their neighborhoods. It's true that other groups and individuals do have access to all of the ONC's resources and communications. They are not considered recognized, however, and will not receive developer notifications and permit application notifications. City departments other than the ONC have the responsibility of notifying recognized neighborhood associations and recognized coalitions of changes in city services, major infrastructure projects, city street construction or closure, filming on city streets, and major city development per the IDO requirements within a specific radius. The ONC has the responsibility to maintain recognized neighborhood association and coalition contact information, to disseminate this information to permit applicants, developers, and city departments for notification about city projects and development, to offer information, assistance, and resources for creation and maintenance of recognition status, and to provide resources to neighborhood associations, coalitions, individuals, community groups, and businesses. And I will stand for questions.
Thank you, Ms. Baca. Councilors, are there any questions? Councillor Benton.
Just a quick question, Vanessa. Some of the requirements that for maintaining recognition were carried over from, these aren't newly out of whole cloth. Some of them existed before, such as the annual meeting requirement and some of that kind of just basic reporting, correct?
Madam Chair, Councilor Benton, that is correct. Neighborhood associations have always been required to submit an annual report to our office with the specific date of their annual meeting, and it is the annual meeting date itself that tells us when their annual report is due in our office. That's one of the very clear conditions of recognition that has always been in the NARO and carries over into the updated NARO, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, Councillor Gibson, do you have a question?
Yes, but it's not really related to the history. Are we specifically talking history here, or can I ask?
I think you can ask a question, Councillor Gibson.
Okay, thank you. I'm trying to follow the rules. So I printed off several emails that I've received in the past several days. And I think most of this has already been talked about. And this one thing, maybe not. So there was someone who wrote I think all of councilors about a problem or a complaint that they're stating about the restriction of the ability to collect dues. And I'm not, it sounds like they might be confused, but I don't want to automatically jump to that conclusion. Has there been any talk about the narrow restricting dues collection? The closest thing I can think of is kind of the opposite, that they can't, if I'm unable to or refuse to pay my dues, I still get to vote.
Councillor Gibson, are you okay if we address that question to Ms. Baca?
Yes, ma'am. That's who I was
Thank you.
looking at her.
Ms. Baca, would you like to respond to that question?
Madam Chair, Councilor Gibson, yes, I'd be happy to. So yes, it's correct that the NARO does not restrict the collection of dues. There is nothing in the NARO that says neighborhood associations cannot collect dues. Just to reiterate that it's membership and voting rights that cannot be based on somebody's ability to pay dues. And there's also nothing in the updated NARO that prohibits any type of fundraising that the neighborhood associations and or coalitions can do. And in point of fact, there are several existing neighborhood associations currently that do not charge dues to their membership, and they do utilize other fundraising methods. So I just wanted to point that out as well.
Thank you. And one follow-up, if I may, Madam Chair.
Yes, please.
I heard early on one of the speakers mentioned insurance. They had insurance premiums to pay. And I do remember hearing that about neighborhood associations. I think it was related to neighborhood signage. So do we have, I don't think that's a requirement that city places on neighborhood associations, but is that common? And even if it's not common, what is the need for insurance? I don't know, maybe you're not even familiar with that, but if you are, I sure would appreciate a.
Madam Chair, Councilor Gibson, I'll address that question as much as I'm able. So the question of providing insurance to neighborhood associations has been asked a few times. It's my understanding from city legal that the city cannot provide that type of insurance coverage because it would be a violation of the city anti-donation clause. Not being an attorney, I can't really speak more specifically to it than that. but that's the explanation that was given to me. I believe the question of liability had come up with some neighborhood associations in relation to their neighborhood sign previously. So the neighborhood association signs are owned by the city, and that sign program is administered by the Office of Neighborhood Coordination, by my office specifically. And so the fact that we own those signs means that we maintain we're responsible for any kind of damage or liability that is incurred as a result of any kind of damage to those signs. Say somebody hits a sign with their car and is injured, the city would maintain that liability. It does not fall on the neighborhood associations. And so by the same token, we take care of the majority of the repairs and the upkeep that those neighborhood signs might require. Neighborhoods are required to do very minimal types of, not even really upkeep. Some neighborhood signs, for example, have what's called a letter board on the bottom. The neighborhoods can go and change the letters out and announce meetings or different events. Replacing those is the responsibility of the neighborhood association, but we do provide the initial set of letters, and we do pay for new neighborhood signs and replacement of damaged signs. So I hope that addresses at least some of your question.
Well, it does. But is there another reason why, to your knowledge, why neighborhood associations would want to get an insurance policy? I see Mr. Melendez just turned his camera on, so maybe he would be a good person to ask this.
I'll give it a shot, Councillor Gibson and Madam Chair. So there's sort of a long history to this question about insurance and specifically signs. The city used to administer the sign program a little bit differently, wherein the sign was actually not owned by the city. It was actually donated to the neighborhood association. In that instance, for a long time, we were sort of wrestling with this question of whether or not the neighborhood association should or needed to maintain some level of insurance because of any potential liabilities that may come from that sign. I mean, if we have a strong gust of wind or a strong storm and the sign is no longer, ship-shape, sort of to use that term of art, then if somebody is negligent in going out and fixing that, then liability could flow. The way that program is now being administered, though, is as Ms. Baca described, where the city actually continues to own that sign. And so it really mitigated that particular insurance question. Beyond that question, I mean, I think an individual association, quite frankly, depending on their level of concern or sophistication or resources, could address that question for themselves as to whether or not they would like to have the insurance in place to sort of mitigate against some potential risk. However, just given the function of the associations, it's a little bit hard to envision what type of liabilities might actually befall a neighborhood association as they perform their functions. And as a lawyer, that's a hard thing to say, because you're always trying to predict the unexpected, right? Because that's where liability comes from. But neighborhood associations don't maintain a premise like a store or a corporation or business might, where liability might result from maintenance of that premise. They're not providing goods or services to the general public, wherein one of those services might be performed negligently. So all those things said, a neighborhood association, being a relatively informal community group, probably doesn't need a big fancy insurance policy for anything. But again, depending on the level of concern, the activities, the risk that they are concerned about, that is within the decision-making capacity of each association as to how to address that question.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Melendez. Are there any other questions? In that case, let's go on to some amendments that we see. Councillor Benjamin, would you like to present your amendment first?
Yes, Madam Chair, I will move, this will be committee amendment number 1. I think that's correct. Is that, staff could correct me if I'm wrong?
Yes, that is correct.
And this amendment is multifaceted. It goes through 10 points, and I'll just briefly go over what those are as opposed to reading each of these, and then I guess I defer to staff somewhat, but let's just go one at a time, and then the staff could weigh in. But on page 3, insert the following new text on line 8: in person. In person, this is a definition. In-person meetings and voting may include the use of virtual online meetings. In other words, they don't have to be in person. This is acknowledging the reality of that you can count as being in person, as people are on this call, without having to be there physically. And then on page number 2 is page 4, line 18, revised section 4 as follows. I'm going to read the complete language and then the underlined change. This has to do with the boundaries of the association. It doesn't have to do with the boundaries. Anyone living within the boundaries who affirmatively join the neighborhood association may be counted as members. The bylaws must clearly identify how membership is established. Dues may be collected. However, payment of dues cannot be a prerequisite of membership or voting rights in the association. So again, that I think we discussed that at length earlier. The third is on page 4, line 23, revised section 5 as follows. This has to do with the annual meeting, and this eliminates the 2 weeks in advance. It just says that notice must be given or shall be given to the ONC of the annual meeting so that they know that it is going to occur or that it has occurred, so that ONC can then process the renewal of their status or maintenance of their status. Number 4 is on page 5, line 25. Insert the following and renumber accordingly. And this adds C. If a virtual online meeting is used for an in-person vote, votes must be recorded via a roll call vote. And I'll ask staff to explain that.
Who would like to explain that for us, please?
Madam Chair, Councillor Benson, this item is in relation to the in-person definition change. The purpose of this is to clarify how voting would occur if the in-person meeting occurs on an online video conferencing platform such as Zoom or Google Meetup. Yes. And in that instance, the voting must be through a roll call so that there's an accurate recording of what that vote would be.
Okay. So when it's just a vote of those present physically, then they can just record a vote of what the vote was. But if it is done online, then sort of the way we do, there has to be a roll call vote so that there's some record created.
Madam Chair, Councillor Benson, yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, and we do have this up on the screen. Maybe we could enlarge that a little bit for everyone's convenience. I've got mine separately over here. On page 6, line 14, revised section 5 as follows. And this was a suggestion. Many of these are suggestions and have to do with the comments we received for the public. This strikes the words "a statement" and just says evidence of how the annual meeting was noticed pursuant to the ordinance. For example, a copy of the flyer that was used. So it's just saying very simply, as opposed to a statement or some lengthy description or anything, just providing, for instance, a copy of the flyer, or for instance, it's not saying this here, but for instance, a copy of a screen capture of a digital notice, or a photo of a neighborhood sign that has the meeting notice. And that has to do with the annual meeting only, to be clear, not to any other decisions or meetings of the organization. Next is 6 on page 7, line 11, revised section 2 as follows. Membership must be open to all recognized neighborhood associations. This has to do with coalitions. So membership in a coalition must be open to all recognized, or a recognized coalition, to be clear. People can form any coalition they want, but if the coalition wants to be recognized, as we've discussed tonight, it must be open to all recognized neighborhood associations, homeowner associations, business groups, and community groups within its boundaries, and may also be available to individual households and property owners within the boundaries of the coalition, but who are located outside the boundaries of any recognized neighborhood association. So this is making clear that recognized neighborhood associations make up, and they already have their own requirements, of course, but they make up many of these coalitions. If a coalition's area has areas within it, as some of them do, that don't have any recognized neighborhood association, they may choose to have individual members or individual household members. They're not required to. They may choose to have individual household members. One household, one vote, not a family of six having 6 votes. But only if they're outside of a recognized neighborhood association that's part of the coalition. So that's the way that change reads. The other language was already in there. Next, at 7 on page 7, line 24, revised section 4 as follows. Only those association groups, persons within the boundaries of the coalition, this again under coalitions, who have affirmatively joined the coalition may be counted as members. I think we want to change that householding. We've got persons, so that is probably, I'd ask staff to administratively change that to households, because I think that's what our intention is. The bylaws must clearly identify how membership is established. Dues may be collected, again, as with neighborhood associations. However, payment of dues cannot be a prerequisite of membership or voting rights in the coalition. Page 8, line 29, insert the following and renumber accordingly. Again, as with neighborhood associations, if a virtual online meeting is used for an in-person vote, votes must be recorded via roll call vote. Number 9, page 10, line 1, revised section 1 as follows. By interaction with their members, residents in the city, the neighborhood associations strive to engage with the community and land use planning, protect the environment, and promote the community welfare. That was a recommendation that we received recently, and we appreciated that. I think, we're not asking anyone to support community land use planning proposals, but engage with those processes. That's something that that they should strive to do. Again, nobody's holding a hammer, but this is defining one of the important reasons why we have recognized neighborhood associations. And then page 10, line 7, revised section 3 as follows. Use best efforts to inform members and other eligible participants in their neighborhood association and or coalition boundary of current issues. And we struck the words for discussion because that's up to them whether they discuss it or not. I will just ask staff if I missed anything or if there are any questions from the committee members.
Thank you. Staff, would you like to add anything? Anyone on the staff? I'm not getting any positive reaction to that. Committee members, do you have any questions? Seeing none. Councillor Benjamin, would you like to close on this amendment?
Yes, committee members, I urge your support. This is, again, as I stated before, this is in direct response to comments we've received, and this is the process. It isn't having a giant meeting with a big long list and people coming up and standing at the microphone. It's we have to get to a point where this is the process. So I urge your support, committee members.
Thank you. I need a second on that motion. Councillor Gibson seconded that. So there's a motion and a second on committee amendment number 1. If we'll take a roll call, please.
Councillor Benton,
Yes.
Councillor Borrego,
No.
Councillor Gibson,
Yes.
Councillor Pena,
Yes.
Councillor Jones.
Yes.
That passes on a 4-1 vote.
Thank you, councilors. That passed on a 4-1 vote. Councillor Benton, do you have another amendment?
I do not, Madam Chair. I think other
Councillor,
amendments.
thank you. Councillor Gibson, we'll go to you for your amendment then, please. Amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
This would be amendment 2 to O2171.
Yes, thank you. I'll go ahead and read the amendment and then the explanation. The amendment is to revise the following text in section 14-8-2-4, application and criteria for recognition of neighborhood coalitions. And this begins on page 7, line 8. The boundaries were in existence and registered with, and we're striking recognized by and replacing it with registered with the city as of October 20th, 2017. And the coalition remains in registered status. Again, we're replacing recognized, which is being deleted, and replacing with registered. The registered status as of the date this ordinance is enacted. The explanation is this amendment revises the text for existing neighborhood coalitions to use the phrase registered rather than recognized as per the current narrow, in which coalitions are registered rather than recognized. This correction ensures that the existing neighborhood coalitions are grandfathered in under the new narrow. I'm moving this amendment for approval.
I'll second that. Are there any questions, councilors? Comments? Thank you. We'll go for a roll call.
Councillor Benton,
Yes.
Councillor Borrego,
No.
Councillor Gibson,
Yes.
Councillor Pena,
No.
Councillor Jones.
Yes.
That passes on a 3-2 vote.
All right. We now have our third amendment, amendment number 3 from Councillor Pena.
I don't have an amendment.
All right. We'll pass on that one then. So councilors, Councillor Gibson, yes.
Thank you. If I'm a little confused, but if it is helpful and it's all right with this committee, I would like to sponsor that amendment.
And this would be amendment number 3, which originally had someone else's name on it. Would you like to give us that?
Yes.
Oh, just a second, please, Councillor Gibson. Let me check with this. I'm sorry. Okay, Councillor Gibson, this amendment basically undoes the amendment that you just passed, I'm being told. So would you like to rescind your offer to sponsor this?
No, I was mistaken. I had a different understanding of this.
Thank you, Councillor Gibson. It's one of those evenings. I get it. So with that, councilors, Councillor Benton, would you like to close on your legislation as amended?
Madam President, I just wanted to see if any other members wanted to comment before, I am going to ask for a vote and move this. I'm going to change the motion to move it to the council without recommendation. But I wondered if any other councilors wanted to speak at this point before we do that.
Thank you, Councillor Benton. Councilors, does anyone else have a comment or anything before we move on? Councillor Borrego.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to let you all know that Michael Brasher did sign up to speak. I received a text from him telling me that he signed up on Monday, so he was not given his due process. So I just wanted you to know that. And he said that he did have a record of signing up to speak.
Thank you, Councillor Borrego.
I'd like to ask that staff look into that. Certainly we don't.
Thank you,
Well,
Councillor Benton. We'll do that.
And we encourage Mr. Brasher to speak when we get before the full council for sure.
Absolutely.
Madam
Yes.
Chair, if I can just add, we will absolutely look into that. That's very concerning if that occurred. And so we are going to get to the bottom of that and make sure to look out for Mr. Brasher at the absolute next opportunity for him to speak.
And I
Thank you,
believe,
Mr. Melendez.
thank you, Ms. Melendez. And Madam Chair, I believe if we, I have no intention of rushing. I never have had any intention to rush this bill forward. If we go ahead and move this without immediate action and without recommendation, when would it be heard? Staff help me out by the full council.
Madam Chair, Councilor Benton, it would be reported out at the City Council's meeting on September 8th, and it would be first considered at the City Council's meeting on September 20th.
Okay, so just for everyone who's watching, you know, that's a pretty good long time, close to a month before council will consider the legislation. Our ears are still open, our doors are still open, we're still reading our email. Well, the doors are somewhat figurative these days, but so, sorry to say, everybody please get vaccinated. But yeah, so you know, we want to continue to receive comment, and as with these amendments, we put them forward in direct response to concerns brought forward by the public. So
thank you. And Councilor Benton, we appreciate the amount of time that you're going to put into this so we can get as much public comment as possible.
and you know, that's, again, you know, this is the kind of process that makes it very difficult to conduct by, you know, especially during these times, you know, public meetings. That's pretty hard to pull off.
Councilor Benton, if I may, before you go to your close, may I would like to take a question from Councilor Pena.
Sure.
Just for clarification, so are you moving a no rec to full council?
That's correct.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Pena. All right, Councilor Benton, sorry I interrupted you.
So that was my motion. I don't know if we need another second since I changed my motion.
Let's do that. Let's do it formally again. Let's give the motion and ask for a second.
So I will move this for recommendation or for no recommendation to the full council.
And Councilor Pena second that.
Thank you.
So councilors, we have a motion and a second to move this legislation as amended to full council, and we're moving it without recommendation. If we take a roll call, please, if there aren't any other comments. Seeing no other comments, we'll take a roll.
Councilor Benton,
Yes.
Councilor Borrego,
No.
Councilor Gibson,
Yes.
Councilor Pena,
Yes.
Councilor Jones,
Yes.
and that passes on a 4-1 vote.
Thank you, councilors, and good evening, good conversations, and seeing no further business, this LEPS committee meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you.